In this video, I'm going to describe a process of figuring out how to go about answering one of these essay questions. This general approach I think is useful even in exam conditions, though you have to tweak it a little because you don't have as much time. But in general, I think it's a good way to go about thinking about how to answer the question. So, I have a question, I open it up, open up the SE2, I see a question, there's two questions. I immediately have to think, oh, I have only a limited amount of time this week. How am I going to go about it? I need to keep on top of that. And so I need to figure out what goes into answering the question. That means I need to understand what's being asked. That's this part. Oops. That's this part here. And I need to understand how it's being assessed. And that's the rubric here. So the first thing that I do is I make a copy, take the copy offline. So I don't want to edit things in my browser because browsers crash, they can make a mess. In general, I want to use nice writing tools that I might have. If you use Microsoft Word, you can use its spelling checker and grammar checker. So there's a lot of advantages to doing it offline, saving copies. If I upload it and something goes wrong with my upload, I'll have a copy. So that's all good. So the first thing I'm going to do is to start figuring out what goes into the question. So for me, I just like to organize things a little bit so that they're clear. So the rubric, I go through and I make it look more like an outline. So, and in particular, I try to look for where the points are going so that I can say, oh, I understand. And now this has become a checklist for me. So when I'm writing my essay, and I'm just before I submit, I go through, did I check for typos? Did I make the mechanics good? Can I say that I'm addressing the question? In my argument, did I have a clear place that I was talking about doc tests, a clear place where I was talking about unit tests, a clear place where I gave a recommendation? And really, you know, this gives me a potential outline. Just from the rubric, I can get a potential outline. That is, if I think about how my question should look, the answer to my question should look, it's going to be something like a paragraph talking about doc test. Right? Why? Oh, because there's a whole point about that there. That sort of suggests that I need to talk about it. And it says doc test discussion. It doesn't tell what I'm to say about doc test. I have to get that from up here. But I know that I'm going to need to say something and say it clear about doc test. And it certainly then suggests that a paragraph talking about unit test. Oops. And then, of course, a recommendation. Now, not every answer has to fit this structure. This is just how I go about it, but you should be aware of what your structure is. And clearly, if I'm going to give a recommendation for one over the other, sorry about the email, I'm going to need to talk about both of them there, and I'm going to have to draw on stuff I say there. Okay, so now that I have an outline, a very simple outline, I need to figure out what am I going to put into this outline. That's where I go back up here and try to understand the question. Okay, so the first part is just background, so I can't ignore that, but it's not really relevant to answering the questions. So I'm going to de-emphasize that for the moment. Here's where the heart is, right? You know, so for this essay, so again, outlining can help me see what's going on and help me not miss things. So this is for the essay. And the you are to provide tells me what I'm supposed to be putting into it. And now I have an overview. So comparative technology evaluation of doc test and unit tests. So the first thing that I ask myself, do I know what a comparative technology evaluation is? I mean, maybe I've never heard any of these words put together in that way. And so then I have to try to figure out, do I understand what it means? So clearly an evaluation is going to be some sort of comparison between the two. I'm trying to say this one might be good for some things, the other one might be good for others, maybe one is just always better. So I'm trying to figure out how they match up. So that's the core. I haven't address the question unless I have provided a comparative technology evaluation. And this right here, if I don't know what that is, that's when I should go ask, or I should go into the forum and ask. And you really can, you know, just close my window. There, you know, if you go to the top level of the, I'm getting a lot of email. Go to the top level course. There's a discussion forum, and in this discussion forum, you can ask questions. I even put a thread up there. This is the perfect place to do that. And as you put in questions, I will steer the conversation in ways that I think are helpful. I much prefer you do it here rather than an email to me, because that way more people can see it and we can share and build on it. If you're not sure if you're going to be revealing something that you shouldn't reveal, you can email it to me first to just double check, but then you should come back and put it in here. This is supposed to be part of our collective understanding. All right, so go back to the question. So I know I need to produce a comparative technology evaluation, and I know that if I don't do that at all, I can lose an extra point. So as long as I provide some sort of comparison, I'm going to get the point for addressing the evaluation. So, you know, there could be extreme ways of going at this. This paragraph just explains what the question is saying. So what does it includes assessing the testing need of wc.py. So what kind of tests am I writing? And the design sweet spots of the two frameworks. So what do I mean by design sweet spots? That's something else that it might not be clear. I mean, what was it primarily what kind of tests was it primarily intended to capture? And at this point, I might go back to the week 2 slides about testing, or week 1 slides, and look to see, remember the who, what, where framework. That gives me some idea about the difference between, for example, a system test and a unit test. And obviously the unit test framework in its name is saying, hey, I want to do unit tests. And the doc test framework is saying something a little bit stranger. Hey, I want to do documentation tests. Well, I can read about it. There's a lot of literature out there. If I Google for both of these, you'll find information. If I go to the mainline documentation on python.org, it'll have other discussions. This is part of where you do a little bit of research to try to understand what they were trying to do with those frameworks. What kind of tests were they trying to support and support well? And does it support the kind of tests that work here, that you needed? How might it not? Well, I'm sure some of you had some experiences with doc test where it wasn't, there was subtleties in whether you had to put a B before the string, or sometimes you put in a /t and sometimes doc test expanded it and other times it didn't. That could be just bugs in doc test, but it also could be that you're doing something that doc test wasn't built to do. And that might mean, and so that might mean for WC, it's not the right framework for that. And so in general, then you need to start building a pro and con list for each framework. Specialize for your testing needs, and then after that, based on that, I need a recommendation. Okay, so already pro and con lists. So the first thing I go down here and say, so first of all, I remember, I put a big memory. This is all with respect to wc.py's testing needs, right? So this little bit of text here is not going in my answer. It's just a note to myself to remind me that I'm trying to keep things going. I'm doing my evaluation in light of what I did, what happened to me in wc.py. So for some of this I can talk about, so given that I have to root it in wc.py, and that means I'm going to use examples from what I did in the past week, it means I can start writing stuff about doc tests because I've already written a bunch of doc tests. I can't yet do anything about unit tests because I haven't done anything for unit tests. But still, today, Friday, I can go about and say, start making my pro and con list. And I'm going to need a pro-con list down here as well, obviously, in the end. And the other note I want to give to myself is, what's the design sweet spot? Now again, not all of this will go into the answers. When you build up a set of notes, you're building up some stuff that might be thrown away. That's okay. These are notes to yourself. Ultimately, you need to come out with a paragraph talking about doc tests, giving your outline, but these are things that you may or may not use. You put them there to see whether they'd be helpful. So, you know, some sort of, there's some sort of notion of easy to write, right? That would be an example or more tests like you do at the Python shell, right? So, you know, when we go into a shell, we go Python, and you know, we write a little function, def add 1, right? So that's a very simple little function that I created. If I want to test it, I do things like add 1 to 1. Oh, 2. Now, so this is the kind of, this is sort of very initial playing around sort of testing. With the doc test framework, I can just cut and paste this into a doc string, and it's a test. Instead of just being a throwaway test that I put there, it's my explorations can become real tests very easily with almost no work. So that's clearly the design sweet spot of doc test. And so, you know, what kind of pro might I write? You know, easy to cut and paste shell tests. So now this pro may or may not be relevant. It's certainly part of the design sweet spot, and it would be easy to say this, but the question is, did this actually work? Can I, for example, go to WC index HTML? Oh, I have an answer. Can I just cut and paste this into a doc test? Well, no, I have to do more work. So it's not just this, while this is, it depends on the notion of shell test here. It's easy to cut and paste Python shell tests. So that is definitely still part of its design sweet spot, but it might not be so easy. Is it? So I ask a question now. Is it easy to cut and paste shell tests? Right? In this case, I mean ones like that. So now I've done some work. I've taken some notes, and it's not clear whether this claim is true for wc.py. It's clearly true for some programs, but it may or may not be true for the kinds of tests that I want to write. So this thing, which would be a pro in general, and as part of its design sweet spot, might become a con. And so this is what you need to do. You go through, you try to think about what worked, what didn't work. Maybe to make it work, you had to do a bit of extra support stuff. That's okay, but you know, so can work well with a support function. That becomes a pro, but then there's a con. Needs a support function, which is hard to get right. You know, so this would be an example of the kinds of pros and cons. After I get a list of them, I need to select from that list the ones that are most helpful for this assessment. So, you know, both of them, you know, it's a prawn built in to the standard library. Well, that is a strength, right? I mean, I don't need to go out and find it. I don't need to install it. I don't need to keep it up to date. It's always going to be there. But this is true of both of them, right? It's a true pro for both frameworks. So while I should put it down so I can remember that it's there, when I go to do my comparison, it's not very relevant because it doesn't distinguish between them. So after I build I have my outline, I have notes towards the outline, then I sit down and start to write. And I go to a separate window for this because I don't want my notes to be mixed up. And remembering, hey, this is all about it's all about the testing needs, and I need to do this comparative technology evaluation, I can start to write it. So something like the doc test, framework has the following general advantages. And then I might say, when applying or when trying to use it for wc.py, I found, and then some descriptions, maybe partly taken from the pro list, partly taken from the con list. On the one hand, it was very easy to get some tests up and running at all, just simple tests, they failed. On the other hand, some tests were very difficult to write in an effective way, and sometimes if I moved the file around, tests would break because the email the different editors would mung it. Overall, I was able to build a test suite pretty effectively, but there were some issues. And then I do the same for, in contrast, or I just say the unit test framework. And now I'm off and running. Now note here I have 2 typos. Better to fix them sooner rather than later. Now at the moment I can't write this because I can write a little bit of it. I can talk about the design sweet spot, but I haven't yet done any work towards it. So I need to go write some unit tests using the unit test framework. I don't need to convert everything over necessarily, but I need to at least convert some of them. And the ones I would look for is a test that I found easy to write here. Was it as easy to write there? If so, it's not a strong point of comparison. It doesn't distinguish the two. Did I find a test that was really hard to write here and it turned out to be really easy to write over here? Well, that's a great point of comparison. Can I generalize that? Just one example. If it's just one test out of hundreds, it's not so interesting. If it's a pattern of tests, then that's something that's worth comparing. And then in the end, I still need this recommendation. And I said, in light of the common benefits, both are okay. Something like, I could write that. I could say, but I would need to say more about why these common benefits make them both okay. If I'm recommending one, I recommend moving to whichever one you think it is, because while the other has this benefit, a point that was in advance, it was preferable for it. Oops. My preferred framework is, and then something like so much easier, or there's so many other benefits, or so much more reliable, or so much more fragile, and that's most important here. So you need to construct an argument. And in the end, I should be able to go back and if I've included everything that I wrote here, I've probably included too much. Right? This should be a dumping ground. You put everything that you can think of here, and then try to pick out the best stuff that clearly goes for what you want. After I've done this and I've written this essay, so I could have done all of this today, right? This is my initial sketch. This is my initial writing. I need to do more work to gather evidence for unit test. So I can't finish the essay today, but I might work on unit test over the weekend. I have where I plug it in. So I can't fully write this paragraph. I can really only write this paragraph today. So then I try to write this paragraph and I let it sit, and then I come back and read it without looking at my notes. I cover up my notes and read it. And I read it. First thing I do is I take the rubric and I bring it over. And I read it without looking at my notes, and I say, oh, was there a typo? Oh, look, there's a big typo right there. Did I break things up nicely? Do my sentences make sense? Do I contradict myself? Second is, did I address the question? Is there a comparative technology evaluation? Do I compare the technologies? So I have to describe them, and I have to compare them, and I need to come up with a recommendation. And then here, how was my doc test discussion? Do I really get at pros and cons for the doc test? Do I get to only the relevant ones? Do I give concrete examples? Do I give summary data? These are the things that we're looking for. Similarly for the unit test. And then in the recommendation, did you actually make a recommendation that references what you said before? Because it's supposed to be based on the data. So this is how I go about writing an essay and trying to answer the question. And I think it's a pretty good method. It involves several revisions. It involves really thinking about the question, and it involves transforming the question, right? I go through and I try to break it apart to make sure that I understand all of the little bits, and I understand how these bits relate to the rubric, because there is a relation between them. And then I start writing notes. I don't start writing my essay right away. I try to write notes. After I've gotten my notes together, then I start trying to write my essay. So I hope this helps. Let me know if there's something that's still confusing. Not everybody writes their essays this way. This is just how I go about doing it, though I teach it to a lot of people, and a lot of people find it helpful.